Come on, Bobby. It's time to get over it. She's back with you and she'll never cheat on you again. You've been together for 15 years. You have two wonderful children. You don't want to ruin all that. If you divorce, she will get your boys and you will both live in poverty. If you get back together, it will be better for your whole family. This wasn't just a case of her getting drunk at a bachelorette party and having fun with an old boyfriend. This was something serious, and the punishment had to be meted out. My problem was that if I was the one who pushed the red button, the nuclear blast would hit me far harder than anyone else. No one had more to lose than me. And this bitch lecturing me wasn't helping my mood or my ability to come up with the perfect plan. That's where I found myself in the role of Bobby Smith, sitting on a pontoon boat on the lake with the three of us. This bitch, her chatty asshole husband, and my cheating wife. Being a Kansas native, I was never going to swim 300 yards to shore, an Olympic challenge for a flatlander. In 10 minutes, I was going to shut their mouths and give my cheating wife an unforgettable reminder of her cheating. Now a little background on me, the poor bastard at the center of this shitstorm. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, the self-proclaimed air capital of the world. This industrial city is home to Boeing, Cessna, Spirit, Beechcraft, and Embraer factories. My grades in school were average, but my parents didn't care. Mom was an alcoholic, smoking, and rough-talking whore. Dad generally considered himself married when they got together. My older brother and sister, who supposedly had the same father as me, couldn't handle the fighting, bullying, and 911 calls from concerned neighbors. They left the same day they graduated from high school. They wished me luck and never looked back, afraid they would end up as witnesses in a murder trial. Teachers told me I was smart enough to get good grades, but I felt there was little sunshine in my future. At least I waited until the morning after graduation to leave home. My first and only stop was the U.S. Army Recruiting Center. Because I did well in the shop, I was signed up as a wheeled vehicle mechanic. It was one of the first times in my life that I felt like there was something positive in my future. To others, the pay of an Army private was a pittance, but I felt like a king. My platoon sergeant liked me because I didn't cause trouble, did my job well, and got along with the other guys. We drank and partied for 2 years. After I finished my military service, I decided I wanted to go back to Wichita and work at one of the aircraft plants. I enrolled in the National Aviation Training Center to get the special training and education necessary to get one of the best jobs. My major was aerospace manufacturing and technology, and I decided that was where I could succeed. Cessna was my first choice for a job, and I was happy when they hired me. 6 months later, I was helping a buddy build a workshop in his garage and had a life-changing accident. I was not happy about it at the time and berated my buddy for missing his part of the metal roofing. This mistake resulted in a large cut on my chest that bled like a stuck hog. At the first sight of blood, I called medic and then laughed because I was no longer in the military. My buddy applied a store rag to the cut to stop the bleeding, and we went to get medical help. There was a doc in the box just a mile away, and he drove there in his pickup truck. I wasn't bleeding, but the floor was a mess, so they put me in the treatment room right away. Not for my safety, but so they wouldn't see the guy dripping blood all over the hallway. What happened next changed my life forever. The most beautiful nurse that ever lived on Earth walked into my room. She was tall, well-built, with shoulder-length dark hair, and her smile lit up the entire room. Her name tag read Nurse Ann. Looking at my jeans, work boots, and bloody t-shirt, she turned her gorgeous blue eyes to me and said with a smile, "I didn't know there were auditions for the TV version of Jackass today." I don't know, because I've been busy single-handedly building an orphanage and treating cancer. My wound is the result of a metal sheet being blown off the roof, to the cheers of Mensa Society members celebrating my discoveries. She half smiled, half chuckled, half laughed at my comment. "It's only 10:30. How many beers have you had so far this morning?" "None so far, but that depends on how long it takes you to get me cleaned up." "After all, you can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning," I answered her. Looking at my chart, she asked, "I take it you smoke cigarettes too?" "Yes." "You look a lot like my brother." she muttered. Do you like your brother smoking? She took a deep breath and replied, Yes, but there are days. I asked, So there's hope that I can get you out since I'm so much like your favorite brother? To which I replied, Ha, please take off your shirt. I have better things to do than spend time with a jerk like you. I had a hard time pulling my shirt up over my bloody shoulder. She cut the shirt open, but only after shaking the scissors threateningly in my face. Without saying anything, she began wiping the blood and dirt off my chest. I'm 6 feet tall, 190 pounds, mostly muscle. I think that was the reason it took her longer than I expected. She giggled when I reacted painfully to the disinfectant alcohol that was liberally sprayed on my wound. I would have thought she should have gently told me, This is going to hurt a little bit now. She stepped back to the door, turned to me, pointed to the examination table on which I was sitting, and said sternly, Stay. Only for a second did I see her smile. A few minutes later, Nurse Ann and the doctor returned to the room. I read the worry on her face that I would continue to act obnoxious and embarrass her. If I wanted to get anything out of her, I needed to be a better patient. When answering questions, I would say, Yes, sir, no, sir, no, sir, no, sir, no, sir, no, sir, yes, doctor. I was pleasant and obedient no matter what I was told. As the doctor scrutinized my wound, she stood right behind him. I winked my eye at her, she smiled. The doctor had Anne prepare a syringe to dull the pain while he gathered needles to stitch me up. After Anne put the bandage on, the doctor told me, No activity, keep the wound clean and make an appointment in a week for Anne to remove the stitches. Great! I was looking forward to seeing her. He laughed, she blushed, but I was happy. Smirking, he said to me, We need this room cleaned in 3 minutes. Can I count on you two to finish whatever needs to be done in that time? Yes, sir, I said, but Anne didn't say anything back. She just smiled. What time can I pick you up for dinner tonight? I said with a smile. She thought for so long that I decided it was going nowhere. Then she said, Tonight at 7 o'clock. She had a funny look on her face when she asked, Red pickup? Yes. Gee, she said and left the room. I headed home to get myself and my pickup cleaned up for the evening. I was wearing clean jeans, a fresh cotton shirt, and nice leather shoes. Anne would have been shocked and disappointed if I'd worn anything better than that. Her outfit was identical to mine, only she looked much better in her skinny jeans. More men looked at her cotton shirt than mine. She could work her legs in such a way that a 6'7" woman could gracefully climb into a 3-4-ton pickup truck. After an initial period of awkward silence, the conversation continued throughout the evening. We both told stories from our lives. She was originally from a small town in southwest Kansas that I had never heard of. Her parents and brother farmed and ranched there. I rarely traveled outside of town, so I could only guess what was there. By the time we left the Mexican restaurant, it was getting dark. I asked her if she had seen the statue of the guardian of the plains on the rivers. She had no idea what I was talking about, so I took her to the confluence of the Big and Little Arkansas rivers. Where the two rivers meet in downtown Wichita, artist Black Bear Bosine created a 44-foot-tall statue of the Keeper of the Plains. Native American lore tells of various tribes gathering at this spot on the powwow. In the 1870s and 80s, drivers from the Chisholm Trail kept longhorns here before the live cattle were loaded and shipped to Chicago for slaughter. I learned about this when I visited the Wichita Cow Slaughterhouse, which recreates Wichita in the 1870s. It was an impressive place at night with spectacular lighting and a bridge over the rivers symbolizing a bow and arrow. She had lived in Wichita for several years, but had never been here. We stood on the riverbank and admired the view and all the families that had come here for the night's event. I kept my eyes on the clock, and when it struck 9:44, I moved over to her and gave her a hug. She accepted the offer with a smirk and a wiggle. At 9:45 p.m., 7 bonfires on the river exploded with a huge rumble and 30 feet of gas flames shooting up into the air. This caused Anne to rush into my arms. She trembled with surprise and fear until she felt me hold her tightly against my shoulder. She looked up at me and said, You knew this was going to happen, didn't you? Yes. You don't have to scare me into holding you. Just ask and I'll gladly hug you, she said with a smirk. After that, We kissed for the first time. When the fire pot demonstration was over, we walked back to my pickup, holding hands. I walked her to the door of her apartment, made sure no one else was in it, and turned to leave. "Do you want to stay for a while?" she asked timidly. She asked timidly. She asked timidly. She asked timidly. "I want to stay here for as many years as you'll let me. But I think after our first date, I'd better go home and start looking at my calendar. I need to schedule all the times we can be together over the next month." Anne stepped toward me and wrapped her arms around me. Snuggling as close to me as she could, she said, "This was a special night for me. Be here tomorrow at 6:30 for dinner." The next night I arrived at 6:30 p.m., carrying red roses for my new friend. She opened the door and showed off a beautiful yellow dress the color of the sun. She had a funny look on her face when she said, "These flowers are very nice, but I'm just leaving for a date with someone else. I don't want to be late. Could you please put them in water? And close the door when you leave. Goodbye." Then she popped out the front door. I watched the flowers wilt in my hand. What had happened here? I found a vase, put water and flowers in it, and went to the door. When I opened the door, Anne was standing there laughing at the look on my face. "You tricked me with the pots on the river last night. I caught you today. Are we even now?" "I guess so, until next time," I replied, embarrassed. She took my hand and said, "Come on in. I hope you like what I made for dinner." Before starting dinner, she offered me a choice of wine or beer. I chose beer. We laughed about last night and how much we enjoyed each other's company. We both knew where we would end up later that night. It was the room adjacent to the living room. A lamp was already glowing softly on the night table. It was hardly due to the fact that the cat was afraid of the dark. She was so nervous that she kept apologizing if I didn't like the food. Finally, I grabbed her hands and said, "Stop it. I like the food and the way you made it. Don't ever apologize if I don't tell you what I don't like. But remember, if your hands touched it, that means I'm going to like it, okay?" This made her feel much more confident and excited about my presence. We had a lovely dinner, laughed a lot, and discussed the important things in life. For the next 3 months, we were together every night and all weekend. It was time to meet her parents, and I felt a little awkward, as I had no family in my life. I felt like I was in an orphanage, so it could have been an interesting weekend with her family who had lived on the same ranch for generations. The plan was to leave right after work on Friday afternoon and return to Wichita on Sunday night. Starting my pickup, I asked Anne for directions to her family's ranch. She replied, "Drive west from Wichita 2.5 hours to get to Wyatt Earp Boulevard in Dodge City. Drive west on Wyatt Earp Boulevard until you reach El Capitan. It's a bronze longhorn bull in the middle of the street. At El Capitan, turn south, left onto City Gaze. If you pass Booth Hill, then you've gone too far. Once you turn south, keep going until you cross the Santa Fe Trail. There, turn west off the paved road and wake me up." "You're messing with me again. What are these directions? Where's the address I can plug my GPS into? Why did you wake up to give me directions?" She said, "Bobby, these are directions and landmarks on how to get to the ranch. You'll get there. You wore me out last night. We need to get some rest. Wake me up when we're south of Dodge City." With those words, she pulled up her pillow and laid down, with a smile on her face, of course. There were very few stoplights for the next 2.5 hours. I used each one to stretch and move around so my legs wouldn't get stiff. After 2.5 hours, I saw the lights of Dodge City. I passed 2 huge slaughterhouses and several large concrete grain elevators until I saw a sign that read, "Wyatt Earp Boulevard." Damn, her directions had been correct so far. A few blocks later, there was a statue of a bull longhorn in the middle of the street. This is crazy. Now I need to find the Santa Fe Trail sign. She still seemed to be asleep, but I didn't believe it. She's too much of a perfectionist to let me wander the prairie trying to find a century-old cattle trail. I gently stroked her butt, and she said, Not again, honey. Wait an hour, please." "Come on already. Wake up before I end up in Oklahoma." "Okay, Bobby, where are we?" She said it like she was really asleep, but I doubted she was. "Oh, okay. Here's Miller's house. Only 3 miles to go. She started brushing her hair and fixing her makeup. We turned off the gravel road onto a sign that read, Clear Creek Ranch, EST 1872. A ranch-style house showed up ahead, along with several outbuildings, paddocks, and barns. A couple in their 50s came out of the house to greet us. Anne fussed when she saw her friends in the yard. The pickup barely had time to stop before she jumped down and rushed over to her mother to hug her. By the time I got there, she had already hugged her father and kissed him on the cheek. Mom, Dad, this is Bobby Smith. Bobby, this is Pat and Bill Green. I took off my cap and shook Bill's hand, and Pat gave me a big hug. We went into the house for supper. Anne went with Pat to finish things in the kitchen. I had the unenviable task of talking to this woman's father. Of all the women I had dated, I had never been around them long enough to get to know their parents. This was a new experience for me. Bill said, "It's a long drive to Wichita. Would you like something to drink? Tea, water, beer, whiskey, or bourbon?" "Cold water followed by a cold beer will suit me just fine, sir." "No need to call me sir, Bobby. To everyone here, I'm Bill." When Bill returned, he said, "Anne's brother Gary isn't here today. He had to attend a cattleman's meeting in Dodge. You will meet him tomorrow. Gary is unmarried and lives in a mobile home on one of the other ranches." Since I had nothing to offer in terms of family, I started asking questions about pictures and items in the family room. Bill turned out to be a walking, talking book on the history of Clear Creek Ranch. It was started by Pat Carter's family. They were cattle ranchers and had one of the first brandings recorded in this county. Their branding was two C's, which were placed on the right thigh of the unlucky cow. The Cater and Green families had been longtime residents of the neighborhood. There were pictures of old boys and girls hanging everywhere, and they were all related to Pat or Bill. Both Bill and Pat came from large families, so Anne had many cousins, nephews, and nieces. There were pictures of Wyatt Earp and his brothers, as well as Bette Masterson and Doc Holliday. These were real photos that the family had purchased at the time, not reproductions. Bill's grandfather was in several of these photos as a bystander. He had a receipt signed by Wyatt Earp for a pistol he bought from Earp after the marshal was convinced the bad guy wouldn't need it anymore. What interested me most was the collection of 1873 Winchester rifles in the gun box on the wall. It was the rifle that conquered the West. Their families used these rifles to shoot coyotes, rustlers, horse thieves, bandits, and Indian gangs. It was more interesting than dinner, but Bill and I decided we would continue our journey into history later. If only we knew what awaited us. At dinner, I was able to listen to Pat Carter's family history, which matched Bill's family history. It was very interesting to hear this information about Anne's genealogy. It was getting late when Bill said it was time for him to go to bed so he could get up early the next morning. This was the minefield I had been dreading. Where would I sleep? Was I too presumptuous to think I would sleep with unmarried Anne? Anticipating the conversation, I said, "I'll go get my things." That way, the Greenies would decide where I would sleep. The problem was that they had not yet decided my fate when I returned. They ignored Bobby's question. So I stepped forward and said, "Bill, isn't that the cabin by the barn? When I was a kid, I wanted to be a cowboy and sleep in that cabin. Won't you let me fulfill a childhood fantasy by letting me sleep there?" Pat objected. "Oh, you can't sleep in that old place. The bed has noisy old iron springs, and you won't get a good night's sleep." "Maybe not, but I don't fulfill old fantasies that often. What time do you want me back at the house?" Shaking her head, she replied, "Breakfast starts at 8 a.m. I replied, "See you then." Then picked up my bag and walked towards the lodge. Bill said, "Let me show you the way." Bill and I commented on the beautiful sky studded with stars. Not much light pollution here. As we entered the cabin, he showed me the quirks of the bathroom and said, "Bobby, you don't have to stay here. You can stay with Anne if you want." "Sir, I haven't earned the right to sleep with your daughter under your nose in your house. This room suits me just fine. I've stayed in much worse places while in the Army. This one will suit me just fine." Bill smiled, shook my hand, and went back inside. Pat was right. The bed was awful, but I was tired and content with my life. There was no air conditioning in the room because here on the high plains, summer nights drop to 60 degrees even though it's almost 100 degrees during the day. The windows and door were open to let in a fresh, cool breeze. I fell asleep quickly, but was awakened by a strange sound. I heard the spring on the door open with a groan, and then soft footsteps headed for the bed. Clothes were falling to the floor. I made out the outline of a body approaching me. I spread the sheet so Anne could join me. Damn, I was going to surprise you. You surprised me. I'm surprised you waited this long to get out here. She laughed, making a sound that made my heart snap. Bobby, you made an impression on my mom and dad today. They really liked you a lot, especially Dad when you volunteered to sleep here. If you'd asked to sleep with me, he'd have sent you here. And since you volunteered to sleep here, he doesn't mind you sleeping with me in the house. Since this is the first time I'm meeting your parents, I'll stay in the lodge. There's a reason I told the story about my childhood dream of sleeping in the cabin. As a kid, I wanted to be a cowboy. It was an escape for me to imagine myself in the Old West instead of being with my horrible parents. The pictures of your family in Dodge City with Wyatt Earp and others were fascinating to me. When I saw the cabin, I realized that I got to spend time with a happy part of my childhood. What a wonderful sleep aid it was for me. My eyes stayed open until I saw her walk out the door. After the first blink, I fell asleep, until the sun woke me up by popping out from behind the barn and peeking through the open window. The hot water heater in the bungalow wasn't working, so I started the morning with an invigorating cold shower. After changing into jeans and a t-shirt, I went outside and heard a noise coming from what I realized was a metal car shed. I saw a young man trying to change the inside tire of a large truck. Not to surprise him, I said, "Good morning. Hard work to start the day." "Good morning, that bastard is giving me a hard time. Can I help you? I've done this kind of work before." He quickly replied, "Sure, climb in on the other side and we'll lift it up. Then I'll put the nuts on." Working together made this job short and we were done quickly. As we were crawling out from under the truck, the other guy said, "Thanks, I could do it myself, but I'd be exhausted for the rest of the day." "My name is Gary." "Glad I could help. I'm Bobby." "Bobby? I thought your name was Mr. Wonderful from all the comments I've heard from Anne." Gary smiled when he said that. I laughed at Gary's comments and then said, "I don't know why she says that after all. She's a lot smarter than me. If you don't believe me, just ask her." Gary laughed hard at this. He asked, "If you don't mind, can I ask you one more favor? I need to get this LN 8000 to the shop to have the hydraulic elevator repaired before harvesting begins. So only on the condition that I get my ass back here in time for breakfast at 8 o'clock?" Gary replied, "Fine. Do you want to drive to Dodge in my pickup or your own?" "Why don't I drive that big car? Give me the address and I'll drive into town. I'm sure you have other things you'd rather be doing than driving to the store early in the morning." I jumped in the cab, started the 300 horsepower diesel engine, drove out of the machine shed and headed for Dodge City. During this process, I watched Gary, who was no doubt unsure of my ability to drive this beast. The radio was already tuned to a local Western music station, so I was able to soak up some local flavor during the ride. Gary left the farm later than I did, but we arrived at the repair shop almost at the same time. On the way home, he said, "Thanks for helping me out this morning. Otherwise, I would have had to call for hired help. You really know how to drive like our Big Red. Where did you learn that?" "I spent 2 years in the Army as a wheeled vehicle mechanic. We had to have a license to drive all the vehicles we repaired. How do you use this truck?" From the last week of June through the first full week of July, we used this truck to haul wheat to those huge white concrete grain elevators you saw as you entered town. We have to hire locals to drive the grain trucks, so Dad and I can keep the combines running. Anne takes time off work to help Mom cook and deliver meals to all the workers spread out over 10 miles. He continued, "Since Anne's going to be working here anyway, would you like to get a job with us as a grain truck driver? The pay is lousy, no air conditioning in the cab. It's about 100 degrees. We work 16 hours a day, but the food and sense of accomplishment is great." "You say it's a great job. How can I resist?" And we both laughed. Gary wanted to know how airplanes were made, and I asked how to grow wheat. We got back to Clear Creek Ranch at 7:30 a.m. I washed up in the bunkhouse and went to the main house. Everyone seemed to know that Gary and I had gone for a short walk. Bill asked, "I see you met Gary this morning. I'm surprised he let you ride into town on the Big Red." "He takes great care of that truck. Only the most experienced driver can drive it during harvest." "Yeah, he told me how it's used during wheat harvest." "Hey, Ann, I was offered a new job this morning." She looked at me. "And?" "Yeah, I'll be driving the Big Red during harvest time. Should be a lot of fun. What do you think? Does it fit in with your plans?" She laughed and said, "So my brother told you that I would be here cooking and delivering food to the harvest workers? And you think you're so smart." After a short prayer, our breakfast was worthy of the physical labor that these farmers do every day. In the middle of the meal, I noticed Pat and Bill glanced between themselves. Bill cleared his throat and asked Anne, "Are you having trouble sleeping lately? I thought you were sleepwalking last night." I saw Pat start to giggle, and Anne blushed. She kept shoveling scrambled eggs into her mouth, so she couldn't say anything. She looked at me for an intelligent comment, but I just shrugged and smirked. Anne set her fork aside and said, "I was worried about Bobby being put in the mercenaries' quarters. There might be spiders in there since no one else goes in there. Besides, Bobby forgot to kiss me goodnight." When she finished speaking, everyone, including me, laughed. Anne did too. Anne and I spent the rest of the day in different places. She went with Pat, and I went with Bill. Since I had expressed a desire to be a cowboy when I was young, Bill took me to the Clear Creek Ranch. The Clear Creek Ranch was owned by Pat's family on the Carter side. Bill and Pat then purchased parts of other ranches when those became vacant. There were 3,000 acres of native grass, grass that was native to the Indians, and the area was dominated by bison. They had 250 black cows that were in pasture year-round. Each fall, they bought another 1,000 head of steers to fatten them over the winter and early spring, and then send them to commercial feedlots. We rarely drove on the paved roads between ranches. If we came across another pickup, we were sure to stop and discuss the weather and the livestock market. It was obvious that Bill liked this kind of life and was very successful in his business. When we got back to the ranch, we saw Gary in the machine shed. I lit a cigarette and went over to talk to him. He looked at my cigarette and said, "You know she's going to make you quit, don't you?" "Yes, we've already discussed it. We are in the negotiation stage now." He asked, "And how is that supposed to happen?" "My grandfather was in France during World War II and traded cigarettes for sex with French women. I'm using that as a guideline. Do you think it will work?" He smiled and said, "You don't stand a chance, pal. You're doomed. Since you have a full pack and I'm banned for life from buying any tobacco products, I have to smoke a cigarette from you." I was really starting to enjoy my time with Gary. A barbecue was planned for the evening at a neighbor's ranch. There was a huge grill set up in the backyard, and when we pulled up, it looked like an Indian camp because of the people crowding around and the smoke from the fire. The rancher had prepared delicious steaks, and all the women, including Anne, had brought their best side dishes. Games were organized for the small children, and a concrete slab left over from an old building swept away by the tornado became the dance floor. 3 generations of the same family could be on the dance floor at the same time. I danced slow numbers with Anne and went to the water tank filled with beer for the fast ones. Several young people kept her active during the fast songs, rocking her like a doll. When the songs went from fast to slow, those would grab her and want to dance close and slow. Each time this happened, she would push them away and wave her index finger for me to come over and dance with her. It was a marvelous evening. We were all tired by the time we got back to Clear Creek Ranch. I kissed Anne goodnight and headed for the cabin. I could hear Pat and Bill giggling, teasing Anne for sleepwalking again. An hour later, I woke up to my cabin door slamming shut. I asked her, "Can you go back to your room or will you stay here with me?" "I will stay with my man, as long as I can." Then she fell asleep in my arms. Early in the morning, Anne returned to the house without anyone noticing her. Breakfast was again at 8 o'clock in the morning, and everyone around her looked smug. There was no comment on how anyone had slept, or if they had slept at all. The breakfast menu was bacon and pancakes. I was served last, and everyone watched as a plate of pancakes and a thick steak was placed in front of me. Bill grinned and said, "I think you need this, son." Everyone but Gary laughed, but I'm sure he'll hear the story later. We attended Mass as a family. I was welcomed as a member of the family. From the way I was treated, I sensed that this was the same family I had always wanted to be a part of. An orphan who has found a family that loves and accepts him. Late that afternoon, Anne and I headed back to Wichita with bags of food and wonderful thoughts of the weekend we had spent. The only thing we changed was that I moved into her apartment. Another step toward becoming a permanent family. 3 weeks later, we returned to Clear Creek Ranch. Once again, we were greeted with open arms and welcoming smiles. Carrying the travel bag into the cabin, I laughed a lot. The old iron bed had been replaced with a new double bed with a mattress. Pretty curtains hung on the windows and the water heater was plugged in. On a small table was a vase of sunflowers and a note. "Welcome home, son." The main purpose of this trip was the chaos of wheat harvesting. For 2 weeks, farmers were harvesting crops planted the previous fall. We had to get the grain harvested before a thunderstorm destroyed the crop with hail and wind. Gary and I spent time on logistics to move Big Red to the right fields at the right time. We were ready for harvest, and through everyone's efforts, there were no major mechanical breakdowns. Everything was going well and all the workers were safe, but eventually, we ran out of steam. At the end of July, we were able to return to Clear Creek. Friday evening, we spent with family. Saturday, I helped Bill and Gary clean and repair the equipment and machinery used to harvest wheat. After dinner, Anne told everyone that we were going on an overnight camping trip to see the Perseid meteor shower. Of course, I had no idea what we would be doing, but whatever it was, we would be doing it on horseback. Anne saddled her mare, and I was to sit on Bill's mare. Anne saddled both horses, and we got on them and started walking down the driveway. After a mile, Anne stopped at the gate, got off her horse, opened the gate, and showed me to let both horses through. We followed the automobile trail through the grass. We stopped on a north-facing hillside and looked down at the pastoral view in the moonlight. There was no one around for miles. She opened the bedding behind the saddle, pulled out a fresh blanket, and spread it out for us to lie on. She turned to me and said, "This is a very special place on our ranch. This is where great-grandfather found the springs to water the cattle, and because of that, the family was able to survive. Water bubbled up from the springs in the rocks. My father drilled a pipe and the water flowed into that water tank over there. The Indians thought this place was special too. Although my great-grandfather owned the land, he never forbade the local Indians from coming here. 12 local cattlemen would take one fat steer to the small Indian camp once a year. They also hired a few Indians to help round up the cattle in the fall and move them to winter pastures." She continued, "Tonight, we will watch the Perseid meteor shower, which occurs every July and August. When we lay here, we will be able to see 30 to 90 shooting stars. This is the perfect place because there is no light pollution. I have been coming here for this spectacle at least once a year since I was born. My mom and dad also come here on horseback and talk about all the family members who have been here in the last 130 years. She said, "I told my family we were coming here so we could have a chance to be here alone. You are the first man I've ever brought here. Thank you for the honor. This really is a special place. I didn't plan it, but it's so much better than I could have imagined." We turned to face each other, sitting cross-legged and taking her hands in mine. I said, "Anne Green, will you make me the happiest man in the world by marrying me?" She lunged at me like a snake at a dog on the prairie, quick and deadly. "I will marry you, Bobby Smith. Whenever, but definitely forever. I'll be your wife." As we lay in our arms and looked up at the sky, contemplating what our lives would be like, she jumped up and shouted, "Look!" I saw 1,000 stars, but not what she wanted me to see, so I stood behind her as she pointed to 2 unusually bright stars next to each other. Below those stars was a U-shaped cloud. It looked like a giant-sized emoji smiley face. Anne took it as the universe's approval of our engagement. After a few minutes, the clouds disappeared into the distance, but we stayed behind to enjoy the beautiful sight. Anne, would you mind leaving me alone for a moment? She cast a curious glance at me. I got up, walked over to my horse, opened my saddlebag, and pulled out a small box. I opened the box, and the diamonds sparkled in the light of every shooting star. Needless to say, she was thrilled with the ring. Smiling, she said, "You'll have to ask my father if you can marry me." "I already did that today. Didn't you see the way he glowed during dinner?" Laughing, she exclaimed, "I thought it was because Mommy put her hand on his leg." We laid down on the blanket to enjoy the experience and the view. After a while, she got up and said, "Shall we go freshen up?" She started to walk away, and I followed her. In the middle of the pasture was a cistern with cool, clean water. She threw her leg over it and said, "Come in, the water is good." The water was clear, and the fresh water bubbling up from the ground was cold. Splashing in the water with my fiancé was invigorating and refreshing. It didn't take long to determine that we were clean enough to put our clothes on. We held hands as we rode back to the barns. After the harness and horses were put away, she decided to spend the night with me in the cabin. Before breakfast, she extended her ring finger to anyone who looked that way. Mother shed tears of joy. Gary was happy for both of us. With the engagement began a months-long process of planning and thinking out the smallest details for a successful wedding. I felt sorry for Pat as my mom was not present for the planning and execution of the wedding. The wedding was held at the neighboring Greens Church. It wasn't a very large building, but it was expected that many friends, neighbors, and relatives would be invited. I didn't bother to ask Bill how many steers he would have to slaughter for the wedding dinner. Gary was my best man, and 3 buddies from work were my groomsmen. With Anne at the altar were 4 of her cousins. Bill had arranged to seat the guests on either side of the aisle so as not to draw attention to my lack of relatives. The wedding went off without a hitch, and everyone had a great time. My work buddies enjoyed dancing with Anne and Gary's attractive cousins. 2 days later, we boarded the Amtrak Southwest Chief train in Dodge City and left at 5:55 a.m. for Santa Fe, New Mexico. The week we spent there was wonderful both in and out of the hotel room. After that, we began to live life as befits a young married couple. That was until that fateful Saturday afternoon a few years later when I received a call from the city police. Anne had been in a serious automobile accident and was in the hospital in intensive care. I called Bill as I drove like a madman to the hospital. It wasn't fair of me, but I had no one else to talk to about it. The doctor told me she was in critical condition, with severe damage to her heart and major organs. No brain damage yet. He said I could visit her for a while so she would know I was there for her and wanted her to live. She opened her eyes when I called her name. I told her that I was there for her and that her parents were on their way to see her. She grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go until the nurse made me leave. Pat and Bill arrived in record time, 2 hours later. I got them into the room right away, even though it meant I would have to get out. All we had to do was wait and pray. The 3 of us rotated through the night so that someone would be by her side at all times. The next morning, we met with the doctor and he gave us the bad news. Her kidneys had failed, and that caused most of her other organs to stop working as well. He apologized that there was nothing they could do but keep her comfortable. I asked, "Does she know about this?" The doctor sighed and replied, "She's a very good nurse. She kept me energized the whole time. She knew what her injuries would lead to." Pat gasped. Bill turned his face away and tears soaked my shirt. The doctor said, "She will most likely pass away today, so I've authorized all 3 of you to visit her at the same time." Bill went outside to call Gary and ask him to come right over. Pat and I hugged until it was time for me to wipe my tears and head to her room. I entered her room and was greeted by a faint voice. "Hi, cowboy. I'm glad you're here. There's no place I'd rather be than next to you." At that moment, Bill came into the room, said, "Hi, princess," and kissed her forehead. Anne said, "I'm glad you're all here because I only have the strength to say this once. I'm so glad to have lived this life with the 3 of you. You are all so special to me, and I love you all. Listen to me. This is very important. I don't want you to fall into despair and depression when I leave you. Please only think of me in the moments when we had fun. Not that you miss me. I know you will keep me in your hearts. But don't ruin the future by mourning the past. Bobby, you are my one true love. I want you to love again, get married, and have the children you talked about. Please do that for me. Remember, I will always be a part of you. I will always be by your side. I will be your guardian angel until you join me. Mom, Dad, thank you for everything you have done for me. I love and cherish you. Please do me one last favor. Please take care of Bobby. You are the only family he has right now, and I don't know how my boy will do without me. I'm really tired. Let me take a nap for a few minutes and then we can talk again. She squeezed my hand to let me know she was still with us. Her sleep was not restful. She was moaning and mumbling something now and then. About mid-morning, she squeezed my hand hard and then let go. The muscles in her face sagged and there was no life in her hand. She was no longer there. We asked the doctor to take her off the monitors so we wouldn't have to worry about her death, and he agreed. The three of us stood and hugged, saying nothing. I stepped away from her to let the nurse know it was over. We divided her ashes into 3 parts. One buried in their church, one scattered around the Clear Creek Ranch headquarters, and one jar combined with mine and scattered in her special place on the hillside. It was a solemn occasion, and the church was full of people. I still stayed in the bunkhouse while we settled all the details. I took an extra 2 weeks of maternity leave from Cessna and spent it at the ranch. I went back to work to reorganize my mind and focus. I traveled to Clear Creek every weekend to help Gary with any projects that required extra work. This was very good for my mood, as I could almost feel her standing on the porch watching us. Most evenings, I would go to a special place to sit and commune with the spirits that were listening to me. I became more and more involved in the community activities of the Green family. We celebrated Easter Sunday in a special place as it was the perfect place to watch the sunrise. I participated in Mother's Day and Father's Day celebrations with Pat, Bill, and Gary. There were several neighborhood barbecues that were fond memories. Gary invited me to join him and his friends for the first day of pheasant hunting in November. Gradually, I began to move on with my life, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. Anne wanted me to move on too. Christmas and Thanksgiving were hard on all of us, but by the end of the holidays, we were back to normal. Gary came to Wichita every few months, and we went to parties. A year and a half after saying goodbye to Anne, Gary and I were at a bar and dancing a Western in Wichita. 2 young ladies, stylishly dressed in short Western-style skirts and cowboy boots, walked past us and smiled. We set aside our glasses of stale beer and asked them to dance. Thanks to Anne's careful nudging, I was now able to avoid embarrassing myself on the dance floor. Gary and I spent the next hour with Shelley and Kathy, me with Kathy and Gary with Shelley. Kathy excused herself to the restroom and Gary went to get drinks. Shelley put her arm around me and said, "Dance with me, please." "Sure." And we went on stage to a slow song. Shelley said, "I don't like Gary and Kathy says she doesn't mind being with him. I know we just met, but can I spend more time with you? How can I say no thank you to a handsome blonde like you? Don't tell Kathy, but I preferred you anyway." It was Gary's turn to be the first to get a pretty girl as a date, and that's what happened. Kathy laughed. "I lost to the guy with the biggest line, didn't I?" "Yeah, but I'm better looking and a better dancer." We spent the next few hours talking, drinking, and dancing. I got her phone number and asked if we could have dinner Sunday night, and she agreed. Gary had a good time with Kathy, and they could get together the next time he was in Wichita. It was obvious that Kathy was not going to drive to Dodge City to meet him. Shelley and I had a lot of fun that Sunday. It was a little upsetting when she asked how I knew Gary. I replied that he was my brother-in-law until my wife was killed in a car accident. He's a good buddy of mine, and I go pheasant hunting with him every fall. She was sympathetic to my situation, and we never talked about it again. We continued our normal relationship. We had dates in the middle of the week just to do something together. Saturday night, we had our usual date night, dinner, a movie, and some dancing. Then we added a Sunday afternoon to drive around the neighborhood, talk, eat ice cream or something so simple but healthy. We enjoyed every second we spent with each other. It wasn't long before she moved in with me. She was now my love and my world. She didn't mind my week-long trips to Clear Creek to help harvest wheat and hunt pheasants. It even helped our relationship as we both realized how much we missed each other. We had so much in common that we quickly became a couple. She, like me, wanted to have at least 2 children. She wanted to have a nice home after marriage, as did I. Shelley worked in the accounting department of one of the hospitals. She had some education after high school, but not much. Everything was perfect in our world, until one day I came home from work and she was sitting on the couch crying. "Please forgive me, Bobby. It was a mistake and I can't take it back. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." I didn't like her words. What did they mean? I was afraid I was going to lose another lover. I said, "I will forgive you. Now tell me what horrible thing you did, so I can kiss you and tell you it's okay." "No, you will kick me out of the house. Please. I love you. Please stay with me." It took about 10 more minutes of sobbing over this inappropriate event before I just said, "That's enough. Tell me now, or I'm leaving for the bar." Drunks have a better understanding of what they're talking about than you do. So tell me now. "I'm pregnant, Bobby. I'm sorry we talked about waiting until after the wedding to buy a house and settle down. I messed up, please forgive me." I was surprised because she was on the pill. Obviously, that didn't help. My hands went around her face, and I pulled her to me and said, "I have 2 questions for you. Think before you answer. I won't let you come back later and change your story. Are you ready?" "Yes," she sobbed. "Good. Pay attention. Shelley, I love you so much. Will you marry me?" It took her a moment to realize what I had asked. Then she asked, "You're not mad at me for getting pregnant? Do you want to marry me?" "Oh, Bobby, I would love to marry you." Yeah. Thank you so much for not being angry with me for getting pregnant. I am very happy to ask you to marry me. I want to live with you and love you forever. Now my next question." She stopped sobbing but continued to make funny wheezing noises. "Can we name our baby Carter? I just love that name, whether it's a boy or a girl." She put her arms around my neck and said, "I love that name too. We are going to have such a wonderful life with our baby boy." The next 2 months passed in a whirlwind of events surrounding the wedding and the birth of the baby. Everything she planned for both events was appropriate and affordable. There were no diva outbursts in our apartment. The only problem was her asshole sister who always insisted that everything be done the way she wanted it done if she was in the same place. She told Shelley that I should spend 3 times my monthly salary on her ring. I told Shelley we could move into her sister's house for 3 months and not pay rent, food, and car payments. Her sister Beth, the bitch, didn't find that an acceptable solution. It didn't help that her husband Hal kept pestering me about how cheap I was and how great he was for paying 4 months' salary for Beth's ring. I know how he paid for the ring. He racked up a bunch of credit card purchases, including the ring, then filed for bankruptcy and walked away laughing about how smart he was. The only disappointment in the wedding was on her parents' part. They wanted a lavish celebration to wow their friends, but were very insistent on not paying a dime for the event. So, Shelley and I had the wedding we wanted for ourselves, not for anyone else. Gary Green was my best man again. Pat and Bill were invited and enjoyed attending the event. I was very happy to see them. Our Carter was born on March 3rd and was a healthy, happy boy. Shelley was the perfect mom, knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. I just did what I was told, except I didn't have to explain how to hold, love, and care for him. In June, we brought Carter to Clear Creek Ranch just in time for the wheat harvest to begin. I had made arrangements with Bill and Pat before we arrived. During the phone call, Pat had an emotional moment when I proudly told her that our son was named Carter. Shelley had only met Bill and Pat in passing at our wedding, so this was her first real visit to them in the ranch. The plan was for Shelley to return to Wichita the next day, and I stayed behind to help with the harvest. When we pulled up to the ranch, Pat almost ran over Bill and Sir Henry's dog to get to Carter. She hugged Shelley first and then carried Carter into the house. Although Shelley was a wonderful mother, she was ready for another woman to help with her son. Neither sister nor mother wanted to do anything but coo with the baby and then ask Shelley, "Do you have anything to eat or drink?" Pat was doing a great job of not overstepping the maternal boundaries that women set when caring for children. Pat fed Carter and rocked him, waiting for him to fall asleep. Taking this opportunity, Shelley asked me, Can we go for a walk? Sure, I replied, wondering if something was wrong. Shelley took my hand and said, I just want to go for a walk with you. You and me, just by ourselves. I love my son, but I like spending time with his daddy. She continued. Pat is just fascinated by Carter. You'd think he was her own grandson. In fact, he's her only grandson, if you count that I'm still her son-in-law. I consider her as close a mother as I've ever had. She and Bill treat me like a son, and I love them like parents. Their daughter is no longer in my life, but I am in their lives and they are in mine. Of course, our relationship is my top priority. I hope you are not concerned about my relationship with them. A couple steps later, she said, I think you keep things in balance. We walked for about an hour. Then Mom's alarm clock rang and we went back inside. All was quiet as Carter was asleep and Pat was working in the kitchen. Bill and I went to meet with Gary to discuss which fields we would start combining the next morning. Bill and Pat took turns holding and feeding Carter until he fell asleep for the night. Shelley couldn't believe how dark the night was until she looked up and saw 1,000 stars as we carried Carter into the bunker. We were surprised to see a brand new baby bed in the room. On it was a blue blanket with boots, saddle, and horses for our little cowboy. It was a message that Carter could come visit them anytime. Shelley came back to our house after lunch. She had planned to leave after breakfast, but she and Pat started chatting and the time flew by. I stayed at the ranch for a week and then Gary drove me back to Wichita when I went to the John Deere dealer for parts. 2 years passed and Shelley gave birth to our second son, Tyler. Pat came and stayed with us for a few days to happily watch Carter while Shelley was with Tyler. As the boys got older, we started spending more time at the ranch. They were old enough to ride horses and understand the old cowboy stories Grandpa Bill told. The 6 of us would go to Boot Hill, where they would ride in a horse-drawn wagon, watch the gunfight on Front Street, and drink sarsaparilla at the Long Branch Saloon. We took the boys to the pasture west of Dodge City, so they could see that the wagon ruts on the Santa Fe Trail still put fear into the land. They loved living surrounded by cowboy history. Every summer we left the boys for a week or two. They made friends with the neighborhood kids and rode their horses to visit each other. Pat and Bill took them to Sunday school, and that widened their circle of friends. The more they stayed on the ranch, the more they wanted to go back there. When they were 10 and 12 years old, they wanted to spend the whole summer at the ranch. We compromised and let them spend the month of July there after the harvest. By then, Shelley was tired of life on the ranch. It was fun at first, but then the work became hard and not as much fun. The whole month while the boys were at the ranch, she wanted to dance and have fun every night. She was approaching the magical 40 mark and wanted to imagine turning back the clock. She went back to work and gained a group of young women with whom she socialized. That fall, I took Carter with me for the first time on my annual pheasant hunt. He had never seen pheasants and was looking forward to joining his friends. There were 10 people in our hunting group. 8 men walked the field to bring up the birds, and 2 at the far end blocked the field for the birds to take off in front of the shooters. The boys walked beside and behind their fathers. After lunch, the boys were taught how to clean and dress the birds. Each boy made a headdress of long, colorful tail feathers to wear in the evening. In the evening, we ate about a third of the birds and froze the rest and took them home. Carter brought home some beautiful feathers for Mom to put in the arrangement. Shelley was not impressed and the feathers disappeared, much to Carter's disappointment. The next summer, the boys decided to spend the entire summer at the ranch. They told Shelley and me that we could come anytime we wanted. Shelley didn't like that plan. She wanted the boys to stay in Wichita, but didn't feel the need to spend much time with them. She worked during the day and went out with friends a few times a week. She would be out the door at 7:30 in the morning and might not get home by the time they went to bed. So you can understand their frustration with the situation. Shelley and I had some disagreements about her not being home. I had no reason not to trust her when she was out with her friends, but I didn't feel she should be spending so much time with those particular friends. Pat called me when Bill was driving her and Gary to Wichita. I realized she was upset, and then she told me that Gary was very sick. All his life, he had been plagued by kidney stones. His constant smoking was exacerbating the problem. It got to the point where he developed end-stage renal disease and needed a kidney transplant. I learned that he had been on the list for some time to receive a new kidney, but none of them were a good fit. I knew he had this problem, but he didn't give the appearance that it was life-threatening. They wanted to meet with me when they got into town. I went to their doctor's office and asked to see if I could be a donor for Gary Green. The next few days were very stressful for the family. The boys were very concerned about Gary's uncle. Finally, as Gary's condition worsened, they decided that I was the perfect match for him. The transfer was scheduled for the next morning. I visited Gary in the evening, and he was overwhelmed at the possibility of receiving the transplant and moving on with his life. He thanked me profusely, and I told him that it proved that we were siblings, even though we had different parents. Early the next morning, we were taken to our neighboring operating rooms. I told him, "I'll see you on the other side," as we were separated. I didn't realize that when Gary was brought into the operating room, his heart had stopped and the doctors were unable to restart it. My surgeon had already made the first incision to remove my kidney when he was informed that the surgery was canceled. When I woke up, Pat and Bill were in my room and I asked, "Is Gary's surgery complete?" Pat started crying and Bill stood up, took my hand and said, "Gary died of a heart attack on the operating table. The doctors said there was nothing they could do because his kidneys had stopped functioning. The water entering his lungs and heart was the final blow." We all cried until the nurse came in to give me sleeping pills. On a bright sunny day, the entire ranch for miles attended Gary's funeral. Shelley, the boys, and I sat with the family in the front pew. Shelley took the boys home and I stayed at the ranch recovering from an aborted surgery. Gary was getting ready to take over the ranch, so Bill had to do more work. I was going to spend most weekends at the ranch to help him. Shelley didn't like this decision as she wanted to maintain her social life with her friends rather than take care of two active boys. We disagreed, but didn't get into critical arguments. She came home from work one afternoon and was as happy as a schoolgirl. She had been appointed to represent her department on an employee committee at work. No extra pay, but prestige and a chance to do something else. The hospital had a connection with a famous football player who was to come to the hospital to spearhead a fundraiser to build a new pediatric wing. Since Lance Belton regularly traveled to Wichita to service his Cessna Citation airplane, his agent agreed to have Lance speak and encourage donors to donate to the hospital. Belton was a receiver for the Oakland Raiders and had a reputation for being a dirty player. Of course, every Kansas City Chiefs fan in town thought so too. At the luncheon, Shelley found herself at the same table as Belton. She was also in the group that took him from room to room in the hospital to visit his children. As his Citation was parked on the Cessna runway, I walked over to where his plane was departing for Los Angeles. I saw Shelley and her friends hugging Lance, and he was enjoying it, kissing and hugging all of her friends. I tried to get closer, but wasn't allowed as the jet engines were ready to start, and people were being pulled back. Lance put his arm around Shelley and kissed her without saying, "Thanks for showing me around." He took her hand and started pulling her towards the airplane. She resisted, but her girlfriends pushed her forward all the way to the airplane gangway. The door closed and the engines roared to life. There was no way I could get on the plane, so I called her cell phone. She answered and said, "Hey, honey, guess who's flying to Los Angeles for dinner tonight? The plane has to be in St. Louis tomorrow, so I'll be dropped off on the way to my next stop. I'll see you tomorrow." And hung up. I ran up to her friends and asked what was going on. They laughed and said, "Shelley is going to have the best night of her life. She's going to fly on a private jet and join the Mile High Club." Having worked in the airplane business, I knew what it was like to be entertained at an altitude of over 1 mile. It was a shock to me. Why would she want to do that? Girls, seeing my desperation, teased me about being cuckolded by an NFL star on his private jet. One girl said, "Tomorrow she'll go back to you and your boring farm life, but this is a night she'll never forget." That's right. She'll never forget the divorce that will ruin her life. That got their attention, and one of them said, "This is a big event for her. Don't spoil that pleasure for her. Very few women get the chance to spend the night with a professional football player in his private jet. She deserves to have fun. Just get over it." I hope she has fun, because it's going to be hell for her when she comes back to my house. I left as I didn't need to hear anything more from these sluts about what my slut wife was doing. I stopped by Home Depot and bought a dozen different sized boxes to load her shit into. I took an Uber to take her to the airport and took her car home to load the boxes into it. She had to drive herself home. Later, I got a text message from Shelley. It was a picture of Shelley kneeling in the aisle of the airplane. The caption read, "Hi, Bobby. Having a great time. Wish you were here." I received another text with the photo. The text was as follows. I am now an official member of the Mile High Club. Invite me over for dinner tomorrow night to celebrate, okay? Someplace really nice. The next morning, I called my boss and asked if I could take a few hours off to take care of important business. He allowed it, and I called the guy who advertised divorce attorneys the most on TV to make an appointment. The guy I met with wasn't a big boss, but he was a young man who seemed smart and had a good understanding of what happens when a wife cheats and the husband wants a divorce. He said, "It's a simple math equation. She gets 90% of the assets and you get 10% of what the two of you had. Also, since you have two sons, you will be paying her 35% of your paycheck for child support. I have looked at your tax returns and salary schedule, and right now you are both just making ends meet. In the event of a divorce, you'll be paying the same bills so that she lives in your house and you get what's left over, which isn't much." He continued, "Bobby, you will need a second job to pay your rent and be able to eat reasonably. Since she will only get a portion of your paycheck, extra things for your boys will be hard to get. Things like sports uniforms, camps, and bikes will become unnecessary, and you both won't be able to buy them. She can live in the house with your boys. You'll be paying the mortgage." I lamented, "So I'm totally screwed. Is there anything I can do?" He said, "Put your ego on the shelf and wait until the boys are at least 14 years old. Then they can choose who they want to live with. From what you have told me, they would rather live with you. Then divorce her, it will still be expensive, but you won't have to pay child support. Your salaries aren't that far apart, so alimony won't be crippling. Here's a battle plan for you. Don't yell, scream, or threaten her. That will only strengthen her position in court. Buy a small tape recorder and record every meaningful conversation you can. You can kick her out of the house for a few days, but she has rights to the house. She can return to it by court order, so don't lock her out. Do not engage in a relationship with her until she has undergone a full and humiliating battery of STD tests." Continuing, he said, "Using history as an example, if she cheated now, she will definitely cheat again. We use that to our advantage. You can't use cheating as a reason for divorce. However, if she wants to get back with you, demand a prenup stating that anyone who cheats, including you, will get nothing in the divorce and will have custody of the boys. Now you have two ways out of this mess. Neither of them will be quick or easy. I'll work with you on any specific clauses you want to include in the agreement if that's the path you choose. You will have to walk a fine line to make it sound like you don't want her back, but at the same time, will allow her to come back with a prenup. So be careful. If she gets a good lawyer because you pissed her off, you could be in a difficult position for a few years, so be careful. If she decides she doesn't want to go back to you, you'll be giving me and her most of your paycheck for years." My first thought was, thank you for doing nothing. Now my main goal in life was to protect my boys from becoming victims of the divorce war. I had to do everything I could to get custody of them. Their mother was a whore, and I had to get them away from that selfish bitch. If I had to play the role of the smug, cuckolded husband, I would do it for the short term. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was the only thing I could do to rid them of her. As I cooled down, I realized I would take his advice, but only after I told her how much she had hurt me. I loved her, and she did this to me. Last night, I was tempted to destroy everything of value that belonged to her. It's a good thing I didn't. I swore she would be destroyed, but I had to hold my horses. In basic training in the Army, we were taught that the greatest test of patience is to wait until the enemy is in ambush range before opening fire. I needed to develop 2 ambush plans, since Lance's wife was going to be in the ambush as well. I got home from work a little before she arrived. As soon as she walked in the door, she got angry and asked, "Why did you bring my car home instead of coming to meet me?" Didn't you get my messages? It was very difficult for me to get home, and I don't appreciate it. I turned off my phone so I wouldn't get nasty messages. Come sit with me and tell me about your trip. I moved to a padded chair so she couldn't sit next to me. She said cheerfully, "It was a great trip. The takeoff was fast and hot. We gained altitude very quickly. The pilot was flying south of Denver, so I was able to see both the sunset over the Rocky Mountains and the lights of Denver. It was breathtaking to watch the land float by. I had a great time. You'll like Lance. He's a great guy." Say that. I was talking to some of your club girlfriends, and they said you were going to become a member of the Mile High Club during this flight. Did you become a member? Now, her face froze for a second as she thought about what to say. She asked, "What is the Mile High Club?" "No, you know, it's a club that a person who has flown an airplane at an altitude of more than 1 mile joins. So you're a member of that club now?" Stammering, she replied, "Oh God, no. Lance was a real gentleman. He knew I was married to a fine man and wouldn't cheat on him. Said that. Why did your friends tell me you were going to join the Mile High Club, and you replied that you didn't know what it was?" Gathering her thoughts, she replied, "I don't know why they said that. Nothing like that has ever happened." "So, you didn't have sex with Lance?" She replied sternly, "No, I did not, and I resent that question. Do you think I'm lying to you?" "Did you kiss him?" She quickly replied, "Yes, just kissed him on the cheek." "Then let me get this straight. The only time you kissed him was a peck on the cheek. You didn't know about the Mile High Club. You weren't planning on having fun with an NFL star on his private jet when you flew to LA. You didn't have sex with him or anyone else on the flight. Is that correct?" She sat up straight and said, "It's true. I'm not lying to you. I love you and I resent you doubting me." "I'm sorry, darling. Instead of doubting your honesty, let's look at the picture sent to me from your cell phone." A concerned expression appeared on her face, and she tried to get up to hide when I said, "Here, dear, is your picture with Gentleman Lance. Or isn't that you in the picture?" The blood rushed from her face and she said, "My goodness, where did you get that?" "Oh, Bobby, I'm so sorry, it's just awful." She fell to the floor in a puddle, sobbing and sobbing. I sat still as a rock, giving her a chance to realize the implications. In between sobs, she said, "You weren't supposed to get those pictures. They are only meant for me, as a reminder of an unforgettable evening. He must have used my phone to send them to you. I didn't text you those awful things." "That's even worse, isn't it, Shell? You're a cuckold and you keep the memorabilia to yourself. You treat me like just another dumb husband who adores his wife, even though she was having fun with some guy she just met. What a sad situation for both of us. Don't you love me anymore? Am I such a bad lover that you are doing this to our marriage?" Now, unable to hold back her sobs, she spits out, No, it wasn't like that at all. It was my exciting adventure. I wasn't going to cuckold you or humiliate you. I was just doing something exciting, and it had nothing to do with our marriage." "Well, then your marriage will be broken as a result of your great adventure. When the airplane door slammed shut, it closed our marriage and our family." She cried, "Our marriage should not suffer. I know I made a mistake and I will never make it again. We can get through this. We just have to love each other enough to save it." Standing up, I said, "I don't know how we're going to do this. Your clothes are already in the car. You and I can't be together right now. You need to go somewhere for a few days until we decide what to do next. Honestly, I can't stand the sight of you right now. Please go away." "But it's my home too," she sobbed. "Yes, it's your home too. But if you want to save your marriage, you'd better leave for a few days. If you don't, with the mood I'm in, I'm going straight to a lawyer to get a divorce. I'm giving myself a chance to cool off. If you want a divorce, then let's duel lawyers against each other for a bloodbath. Bobby, I have nowhere to go. I don't want a divorce. I want to stay with you. I'll never do anything like that again." You have your slutty girlfriends who talked you into getting on the airplane. You can tell them about how you spent one night and upon your return, you faced the hell of your life. They'll be interested to hear the story. She shook her head and said, "Okay, I will. But please remember, I love you, Bobby." That's a funny way to show your love for someone. Everything that comes out of your mouth is your lie. She blew her nose, wiped her eyes, and asked, "Can I call you tomorrow?" "Sure," I said, but I didn't agree to answer that phone number if I didn't want to. The next week, that afternoon conversation happened again. She said she loved me and wanted to get back together. I told her I was having a hard time accepting that her nasty shit was coming back into my house. That evening, I set in motion my plan to balance the scales. It took 3 evenings to complete the project. I texted Shelley and suggested we go out to dinner and talk about everything but our marital problems. She gladly accepted my invitation. Our every word was checked by the person we were talking to, see if it was a veiled threat or excuse. She wanted to go back to our house, but that didn't happen. We parked outside her friend's apartment and I told her we had a lot to discuss. She searched my face for good or bad news. "Shelley, whatever happens to our marriage, you need to get tested for STDs, for the sake of your health and taking care of the boys." She replied, "That won't be necessary since both boys have been good, clean men. I'm not going to trust our son's health to your opinion of good, clean boys. If you don't pass the test, I will get a restraining order to keep you away from them." She took it as concern for our boys, not humiliation. Although that was exactly what I had planned. "Since you told me nothing but lies about your airplane ride, I want to see the results of those tests. You're going to have to work hard to get me to trust you again. Do you understand?" Yes, I understand. If circumstances had been different, I would have done exactly the same thing. 2 days later, she called and wanted to come home for a few minutes. I agreed and opened the door when she knocked. With the shame she was feeling, she handed me the tests. The tests came back positive for syphilis and chlamydia. I was thrilled, but I couldn't show it. It helped me a lot to get a prenup. All I could say was, "Oh, Shelley," but I said it very sadly. She tried to hug me, but I pushed her away and said, "Not until you're clean." Blood-filled eyes looked at my face. She nodded and walked out the front door with tears in her eyes. The next time I saw her, she came inside to show me her clean STD test. She was very hurt that this had happened and was no longer so insistent on asking me to get back together. She suggested I go to the lake with some friends for a change of scenery and topics of conversation. I agreed as I was ready to give a damn about her. That's how we got to where this story started. I turned to Shelley's nasty sister and said, "Shut up. The more you open your filthy mouth, the less I want anything to do with anyone in your family. Shelley, tell her to shut up, or you and I won't be talking until Christmas." At this point, Shelley walked over to her sister and said, "Shut up. You're only making things worse." When the noise on the boat subsided, I stood up and said, "I'm going for a swim to cool off." With those words, I pulled off my shirt and heard Shelley sigh. "Oh my God," she exclaimed. On the left side of my chest was a large tattoo in the shape of a bright red heart. At the top of the heart it said, "My one true love." Shelley thought I did it to prove my love for her. Instead, inside the heart were 3 letters, Anne. I stood there and watched her vomit overboard. She stood up, walked over to me, and touched my heart. "How could you do this to me?" "I could ask the same thing of you, Shelley. How could you do this to me?" She stammered, "How could I look at him when you were making love to me?" "The same way I can look at you with a tattoo in your head. You cheating on me right on board an airplane. What's wrong with that? Now you can feel my pain? Now I can be the one who says, 'Just get over it.'" That was the end of what was supposed to be a neutral meeting. Shelley and I started marriage counseling, and it was all the same conversations we had been having for weeks. No resolution to the main problem between us. She now has a clean bill of health and wants to move back into the house. I told her I agree, but we need to get a prenup so we are clear on what we expect from each other. I met with an attorney and laid out my demands to him. I phrased them as follows. In exchange for Bobby not filing for divorce because of Shelley's infidelity with Lance Belton and others, Shelley agrees to the following. 1. Never talk about Lance Belton or any contact she had with him or others on his airplane. This includes trying to humiliate Bobby with unfavorable comparisons to Belton. 2. Shelley will not engage in written, verbal, or electronic correspondence with Belton. 3. Bobby agrees to never call Shelley derogatory comments. 4. Both parties will make an honest attempt to repair their relationship after Shelley's infidelity. 5. Shelley will be tested for HIV/AIDS at 3-month intervals for 9 months. 6. Both parties agree that if either party comments on the cheating, she will relinquish all rights to ownership of the home, joint accounts, child custody, and child support. 7. Shelley agrees to always tell the truth and never lie to Bobby. My attorney told me that this is a very demeaning post-nuptial agreement, and if Shelley has adequate legal representation, it will be rejected. I told him that in my opinion she was willing to agree to everything I listed. He finalized the agreement to get another $1,000. I presented it to Shelley, and she readily signed it. I could have included a clause in the agreement that she would not socialize with her promiscuous friends. I didn't because I wanted to give her a chance to cheat on me again, and then I would cut her out of my life. She wouldn't have the chance to turn my sons against me. She was glad I helped her move her things into the house. There are only 3 bedrooms in our house, and the boys each have their own bedroom. A dilemma arose as to how we should sleep. We wanted to present ourselves in a good light to the boys, but I didn't want to sleep next to her. Again, I was looking at the end goal of cutting her out of my life, not the short-term pain of sleeping next to her. I hoped that my Anne tattoo on my chest would prevent any contact with her. I would leave Friday night for Clear Creek and return home Monday morning, which eliminated 3 of the 7 nights with her. The remaining 4 nights I had to endure. I turned her down, saying, "Not yet. Let's take it one step at a time. Let time help us heal from this." I lied. One morning, I needed to deliver a part to an airplane undergoing maintenance at the airfield, and I saw IT. It was asshole Lance's plane. I went over and talked to a few guys I knew in that hangar. They confirmed that it was his airplane, and he was in it. I decided to call the plane late at night and see what I could do to make his life, or what was left of it, miserable. I knew I couldn't handle him man-to-man, or even man-to-man with a heavy wrench to man. He was a big, strong man. Thoughts of shooting him or disrupting an airplane landing crossed my mind, but I would miss my boys in jail. Having never come up with a plan, I went back to the hangar at 9 p.m. to see if there were any weaknesses I could exploit. I was surprised to see a light in the cabin, but the door was bolted shut. I found a rolling ladder and squeezed in close enough to see what was going on in the cabin. There he was, sitting at his computer. Now I had a plan. I videotaped the whole thing and went straight to the police station. They were fully armed and called a judge to get a search warrant that same evening. I went on a raid with them to show them where his airplane was and how to get close to it without him noticing them. When the police arrived on the scene, I backed off as I did not want him to find out about my involvement. The police pounced on him from all sides. 2 police officers on a rolling ladder videotaped his computer before ripping out the cabin door. He resisted, but a couple stun blows with a stun gun, and he went quiet. They confiscated the computer and took him to jail. It was all over the news, and I know Shelley saw it but didn't comment on it. She asked me about being near his airplane that night when I was working late. I shrugged and she said, "I hope Lance rots in hell." Me too. And then, since he had his own airplane and plenty of money to flee the country, he couldn't go free. It's not easy for perverts like him to make friends in prison. Influenced by Shelley's whore friends, as well as my rejection, it wasn't long before she was caught cheating again. Not with a football hero, not with a TV star, but with a horny bartender who got her drunk on alcohol. He was joined by a few guys, and somehow the video got on the net. She had to go back to the clinic to get rid of her STDs. My lawyer had assessed her correctly. She was going to cheat again, and now I had her in my crosshairs. After I showed Shelley the video, she collapsed in her chair. I didn't need to say anything. I told her, "Call your slut girlfriends and have them come and get your shit out of my house." The next day, 3 women came over to help Shelley carry the stuff out. I didn't want to miss that outcome. Besides, I didn't believe they wouldn't take and destroy my stuff. I had become the center of their smug anger. The bleach blonde growled, "You'd have to be the biggest jerk in the world to push a woman who loves you out onto the street." Laughing, I said, "She was given the opportunity to entertain someone else however she wanted, but she promised not to." She knew the rules and messed up her marriage. Now she has to deal with the consequences. At the airport, you told me, deal with it. So I'm going to deal with it. By kicking her out of my life and out of my marriage. A disgruntled expression appeared on her face because she knew I was right. Next, we were to meet at my attorney's office to sign the divorce, gift, and custody papers. Shelley had brought her attorney with her to contest everything we had already signed. He ranted, huffed, puffed, 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 and exclaimed, "This post-nuptial agreement is just an outrage. It's just a humiliating rant by an embittered, vengeful man. It's worthless." My attorney looked at me and then said, "You are right. This agreement is demeaning to both parties. It is disgusting and offensive. But as disgusting as it is still legal. That's what you and I do every day. Take something shameful and disgusting and make it legal. So let's get it over with." I left the meeting and Shelley sobbed and wailed in the conference room. "My house, my children, my marriage. Please don't take all of this away from me. I will have nothing left. Please, I'm begging you. Please." That may be the last I hear from her. I hope so. Carter and Tyler started talking to me about moving permanently to Clear Creek. I was okay with that, but I needed to talk to Pat and Bill first. Shelley disappeared from my life, and Friday night I took the boys to Clear Creek. I told Pat and Bill the whole story and the fact that we were now divorced. They were very disappointed in Shelley, but were glad that their 3 boys were not badly hurt. That's right, we were now their 3 boys. As we drove through the pastures, Bill and I discussed moving into the cabin and me becoming a Clear Creek employee. Bill smiled his wise smile and said, "It's interesting that you brought that up. Pat and I have discussed it before and we're going to talk to you about it. We'd love to have you 3 stay at the ranch." We shook hands and continued our conversation. The next afternoon, I was particularly dirty after working at the store, and Pat came out to check on me. I was holding my shirt under the faucet to launder it and make it cooler when she walked into the store. She stopped for a moment, looked at me, and silently started walking toward me. Stopping about a meter away from me, she placed her hand on my tattoo. A tattoo that said her daughter was my one and only love. She hugged me, sweaty, smelling of perfume. She said quietly, she was so lucky to have a man who loved her so much. Yes, I loved her and I miss her very much. She turned and walked back into the house, holding a tissue to her eyes. When the boys graduated from high school, we sold the house in Wichita and moved into the bunker. Both boys had their own rooms, and the third room became the TV family room. We didn't need a kitchen since Pat did the cooking. Shelley kept in touch with the boys through emails and phone calls. I had absolutely no contact with her. Carter was old enough to drive with a limited license to run errands around the house. It was amazing how many places he could find to run farm errands. Both boys enjoyed interacting with the neighborhood children. Amber Reynolds' name kept coming up in conversations about where Carter went and who he was with. I asked him, "Do you know her parents?" He replied, "Yeah, she's one of my teachers, and her dad was a veterinarian but died 2 years ago, and her mom is great." It was a whole encyclopedia of information gleaned from Carter. Toward the end of the summer, the neighborhood ranchers had their annual barbecue. I already knew most of the ranchers, so I felt at home at the party. Standing by the beer tank, I saw a woman looking the other way who I mistook for Anne. It couldn't have been her, but it looked a lot like her. I started to move towards her and she turned around, saw me and smiled. I smiled back and realized that she was of Hispanic descent, and definitely not a clone of Anne. Someone touched her arm and she turned to speak to him. I stepped back, glad I hadn't embarrassed myself. A short time later, Carter and Amber asked me to stop by their house and meet her mother, Emily. I readily agreed. It turned out that the Hispanic woman was Amber's mother. Up close, she appeared to be a very pretty woman with facial features similar to Anna's. We found common ground and continued to communicate after the children left us. We even danced together a few times. As we were leaving the concrete dance floor, I saw Pat walking toward us. She was walking under the arm of another woman, and they had big smiles on their faces. I asked Emily, "I wonder what's on Pat's mind right now?" Emily replied, "How do you know Pat?" She is my mother-in-law, and I live in their cabin with my boys. Then you must be he, she almost shouted. What's he like? Hissed I. The one who married Anne. I was Cousin Anne's maid of honor at your wedding. The woman with Aunt Pat is my mother, Mary Hernandez. Mary and Pat are sisters. My goodness. So that's why your son's name is Carter, isn't it? She called out to her mother. Mom, it's him, Mom, Anne's husband. I finally found him. Emily turned to me and said, Let me look at him. See what? I asked. The tattoo of love for Anne. Please let me see it. I undid the buttons on my shirt. Then she put her hand on the tattoo, and an electric charge ran through both of us. There was a very strong connection between us. We both looked into each other's eyes and realized we were connected. Pat said, I see you have finally found each other. We were hoping you'd do it on your own so you wouldn't think we set it up. Out of nowhere, I realized we were holding hands. Pat grabbed me by my unbuttoned shirt, turned to Emily and said, You and Anne just look alike. You can't help but try to undress that man. We all howled with laughter at her remark. I wasn't trying to create a new Anne, and she wasn't looking for a clone of her late husband. We truly began to care for and love each other for who we were, not what we lacked in our late spouse. The following July, Emily and I rode our horses to a special place to observe the Perseid meteor shower. It was a place she was very familiar with. As we sat on the blanket, cuddled together, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small box. Emily, my love for you is so deep in my soul that I need to be with you every day. Marry me, please. Oh, Bobby, I really want to marry you. You are the best man for me in the whole universe. We kissed and lay on our backs to hold each other, knowing that where we went next would be special to us. Suddenly, she called out, Look! It was it again. The first time since I proposed to Anne. 2 stars and a cloud, smiling broadly. Epilogue. Bobby and Emily got married that fall, and Bobby moved into Emily's house. For the first time in almost 20 years, no one lived in the cabin. That was until Cater earned a university degree in animal science and production management and moved into the cabin. He enjoyed the privacy, especially when Amber came to visit. A year later, Carter and Amber reunited the Smith and Carter families. When they had children, they moved into Pat and Bill's home when they moved into the town's senior living community. Bill still drives to Clear Creek every day to watch them and reminisce. Tyler comes to the ranch for wheat harvesting, pheasant hunting, and the holidays. He has a girlfriend with whom he lives in Kansas City, where they both have jobs. Bill and Pat have provided funds for higher education for their 2 grandchildren. Both boys will visit their mother for holidays and birthdays. She married a man who retired from the U.S. Post Office. The boys believe she is happy now. Lance Belton pleaded guilty in lieu of trial because he did not want the investigation into his criminal activities to continue. He was sentenced to 12 years in a place he didn't like. Pat and Bill transferred their interests in Clear Creek Ranch, Inc. Bobby, Carter, and Tyler, 33.3% each. Clear Creek pays Bill a consultant's fee to take care of all their nursing home needs. Bobby and Emily are completely in love with each other and the way their lives have turned out. They have both been through pain and grief, but have found a way to push it aside. Bobby's tattoo didn't discourage Emily, even though he had her cousin's name on his chest. She happily tells her friends that she's tried to ignore it 1,000 times over the years of her relationship with Bobby, but it doesn't embarrass her one bit. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.